Hey everyone, Camber here. Welcome back to episode 3 of the behind the scenes look of my short film, Coming Home. In this episode, we're going to be looking at camera settings and equipment used throughout the film. And this part's going to be broken down into 3 separate videos. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the scenes that are in the last third of the film. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, so we're here day 1 on location for filming a short called Coming Home, and this is always the worst day because you start getting doubts about everything you're doing, if you think it's going to work out, how things are going to look. Oh, and if you haven't seen the film yet, then what are you doing here watching this already? Go to my other page, Camber Films, watch the video Coming Home, then come back here and see how we filmed it. We're starting with the last scene of the film here, where it's a reunion with the family getting back after being gone for a long time. So we've got a shot list here on the phone we want to get. Golden hour is about to start in just a few minutes. We've got kids we're working with, so we're using bribes or incentives, if you want to call it that. Lots of candy and chocolate to get them motivated between takes. As far as camera settings, we're using 24 and 60 for both shots, mixing them up, going back and forth between slow motion and real time. We've also got for aperture 2.8 for what we're wanting to use, getting a really shallow depth of field. You'll see why in a little bit for that. There's a cat. And because of that, and it being bright outside, we're using ND filters. I'm using my 24 to 70 lens at 50 millimeters. I got the 50 on this camera. This one would be sharper because it's a prime. However, all my ND filters are for my zoom lens because that's my travel lens, so we're using that today. Shutter speed's going to be double the frame rates in all the shots. ISO is going to be all the way down, and using the gimbal for everything today. There's a lot of moving shots involved. Since we're dealing with kids, we're going to do a bunch of takes of everything, hopefully get some good lens flares off the sun. It's getting really close to the trees now, and we'll see how it works out. See you soon. So starting out here, you can see I'm using the A7 III with picture profile 8 with the gamma switch to Cine 4, aperture of f4, 24 frames per second, shutter speed doubled that at 1/50th, and ISO at 200, which is the lowest for picture profile 8. And action! So this is the first shot we took in the video. As you can probably see, there's already a few problems with this. The first most obvious issue is right here, which is my shadow, so obviously that's not going to work too well in the film. And next off, you can see as they're running by, it's more like they're running past the camera and we're just spectators to what's going on, rather than running towards something, which is the feeling I want to get because I'm coming home from being gone for a long time and want them coming towards me. So I switched to the other side, and this automatically fixes the shadow problem, and now as they're running, it looks like they're running towards me rather than just passing by the frame. And you can see now that the lighting on their faces is more dynamic from this side because we're on the shadow side of their face, the sun's on the opposite side, and that just makes it more contrasty and makes them stand out more. And you can see as well here I had my dad in the background, so they had something to run towards and look at rather than just looking into the camera as they're running by. And here's what the final shot looked like in the film. And then moving on to the next shot in this scene, I had us framed with me in the right third and them on the left third as we're moving in towards each other. And this is one of the main shots I wanted to focus on with this scene, with walking towards them. And so I did lots of tests, like here, I was trying different focal lengths, and here I'm using 50 millimeters. And I tried a wider one at 35, but I didn't really like the look of it, so that helped me decide that I'm going to use 50 millimeters for this shot. So the next thing I wanted to test was lighting, since we're using natural light, so I'd see how much time I had to work with before the sun dropped below the trees. So this is right as golden hour was starting, and I wanted to test to see how the lens flares looked. And then here's towards the end of golden hour, right before the sun dropped below the trees. So I knew after doing these tests that I had this much light to work with at the beginning of golden hour, and then towards the end it was going to be going down to this. And you can see there's a pretty big difference there. And so I had to plan out all my shots chronologically, so when we cut back and forth, it wouldn't be one scene with people's faces darker and then we cut to another one and their faces are lighter, so then it wouldn't make sense with what's going on. So with this shot we had most of the same settings, except I had the aperture down to 2.8, and the reason I wanted to do that is so that they would be more blurred out as I'm walking towards them. And as we get closer to each other, they come more in focus until we finally reunite, everyone's in focus all at once, and I just felt like this would enhance that fact even more. And we just did multiple takes of this, both at 60 frames per second so we could use slow motion, as well as 24 frames per second. And I ended up not liking the way that the slow motion looked for that scene of walking up to them, and I just used the normal 24 frames per second in the final film. But what I did use slow motion for were these shots at the end after we had been reunited. And you can see I just had my dad on the camera circling around us while we were acting like we had just been reunited. And with working with all these kids, using that 60 frames per second allows me to slow it down 2.5 times so I can use a shorter clip, since with this many kids they don't typically always cooperate for long periods of time. And you can see him just working around as we're doing this. So this scene here was pretty fast. It was used in the final film, but I slowed it down so it was 2.5 times as long, and it ended up working pretty well. And I just had to tell my dad as well to make sure he filmed us from the other side so his shadow wouldn't be going past us. And it just worked better with the background as well, rather than having cars and a driveway behind us. And also I wanted to see those sun flares behind us as much as possible while he was working around us. And I just had to tell him here again, let's try to work in a half circle behind us so that we could try to get those sun flares behind our heads as much as possible. And here's what the final shot looked like in the film. You can see here as we're kissing with the sun behind us, we get that nice flare going by both sides of our head, and we're both lit up pretty well. So that's pretty much a wrap for day one. The sun's falling behind the trees, so that's it. Tomorrow we're going to come back out about the same time, get some shots of the cars getting back to the house, so we can put all these scenes together and wrap up all the shots for this location. So for this shot we're doing the car coming up scene, gonna have the gimbal in the back. I've got my cameraman actually being my actor now, because I'm gonna roll the camera on this one, and using the sun, getting some good flares right on the left side of it, putting the car down the right third for the framing. And a pretty quick shot, but it's looking pretty good, and I think it'll turn out well. Alright. And here are the settings. You can see pretty much the same as before, except I had aperture at f4, and I was also using an ND filter again. 3, 2, 1, and action! And we just did multiple takes of this so that I could have some options, but it was a pretty easy shot, and this is what it looked like in the final film. Alright, so aside from that one, we got some aerial shots with the drone overhead doing some tracking on the car, so it's pretty easy. And putting all these together should end up getting a pretty good end scene. And as far as the drone shots, these are the settings I used for my Mavic Pro. I had D-Cine-like 24 frames per second, shutter speed at 1/50th, ISO all the way down to 100, and I had an ND filter. And I don't use my drone that much, so I went out and did some practice shots first. I was practicing the side tracking shot to see how the modes worked, and that gave me this shot. And I also practiced this overhead tracking shot so I could get it following my car while we were driving towards the house, and it ended up working pretty well at about 30 miles per hour. However, something to keep in mind is that as you're driving, if you go under something, the drone's going to lose track of you and then stop. And that's a wrap for all the camera settings and equipment we use while recording that last third of this short film. So stay tuned for the next video where we're going to break down more scenes, show you the techniques that were used. I'll see you soon.